You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Chris Creglia. Chris is a detail-oriented mix engineer who thrives off of supporting musicians. He is particularly passionate about music that reflects the cultural experiences of the artist. Music has been Chris's driving force since the age of 11, and for the past 19 years, he has been developing and defining his musical identity. In 2009, Chris's role in driving musical endeavors to their fruition helped to identify his potential in the production world. Chris currently lives in Toronto with his 9-year-old Havana Rabbit and his muse. Chris recognizes the role of his musical family and attributes his growth and progress to those inspiring people. Former guest Connor Salmoro recommended I reach out to Chris, so it's a pleasure to have him on the show. Welcome to Secret Sonics, Chris.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit about how you got started getting involved in production.
A lot of people have a similar story where, you're a musician, you're playing in bands, you're trying to live that dream of playing in a band and playing music and touring the world and writing amazing records. And I just found that I was always the driving force behind every project. And, it was just hard to find the right group of people to be as committed to music as I was. And I also found that I was just getting into so many other different kinds of music. And I just felt like playing in one group was counterintuitive to what I was trying to accomplish musically. So, I thought about going to school for music theory and becoming a session player so I could not limit myself to one type of music. And I also started to entertain the production side of things because, I really admired technology and just I always found myself interested in how songs were made and just different sounds. So I just thought maybe I should give production a try and ended up getting into Metalworks Institute for audio engineering. And then that kind of introduced me into the whole studio world and engineering world. And then I just kind of took it from there.
Nice. Was that a local college or degree or something?
Yeah, Metalworks is it started off as a studio in Mississauga, Ontario, and it was founded by members of Triumph. They're kind of rock hair metal band from, I guess not metal, more like a rock band from the 70s and 80s. So it was originally a studio, which still is a studio, and they opened up an institute for production and engineering. So that's where I went for 2 years, 22 months.
Wow. Yeah. And did you have a primary instrument before you were getting into production?
Yeah, I did. I started off as a bass player and then kind of transitioned into a guitar player, and I was kind of just juggling both back and forth. But most of the bands that I played in, I was the guitar player.
Got it. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people that end up learning a bunch of instruments kind of feel the production bug because you kind of become a jack of all trades music with instruments and master of none. Yeah. And then you realize oh, why do I want to play all of these instruments,
Yeah, exactly. And I also think I just didn't have the attention span to master one instrument because I just loved playing different things, even with drummers who I played in bands with, I would always try and just get some time on their kit and, just mess around with other instruments all the time. So I could never just have the discipline to sit down and just master the guitar or master the bass. And then, I realized that production and producing in general is you don't have to master one instrument, as long as you can navigate well and stay current with what's going on musically. You don't have to be a complete professional in one task musically.
Right. Yeah, totally. It totally suits the producer persona. So did you have an aha moment when you realized you're going to be doing music or production for the long haul?
I had two moments, I would say. Mm-hmm. The first moment was when I was young. I was probably 11 years old. That's when I first started playing music, and it was just band class in school. I played trombone in grade 6 band class, and I was just pretty good at reading music, reading the bass clefs. So my teacher asked me if I wanted to try playing the bass guitar. And I didn't even hear bass at that time. I was just oh, guitar? Yeah, I'd love to play guitar. Mm-hmm. So I started playing bass, and didn't even realize it was a different instrument than the guitar for the first couple weeks. Yeah, it was crazy. I was like strumming the thing, like trying to play chords on like a 4-string instrument. It was pretty hilarious. But yeah, that I felt like, throughout my elementary school, I mean, obviously you're really young at that time, but I didn't really know I didn't feel like I had a purpose, or I didn't feel like I had something that made me unique from other people, and I was still trying to find myself. I mean, obviously at a young age, like, how much can you really find out about yourself? But, I just felt like when I started, playing music and like having an instrument that I actually wanted to play at home, like that's when I was like, oh, like this is actually something I really enjoy. And I feel like I actually have a purpose here. Like, I feel like this is something that I could turn into something greater for myself. So that was my first aha moment when I was young. And then that's when I
could totally relate to that. Yeah.
Right. It's magic when you first kind of like get that rush of just like, whoa, like I can make sounds happen from my hands. It was very meaningful. Like I used to play sports and hang out and do all sorts of things that were fun, but like I never felt the purpose behind it, and music was the first time where I really felt a purpose in my life. So what was the second experience? The second experience was, this is after I had gone to school for 2 years for music production. And I was actually originally started off in live sound, and I really wanted to become like a front of house engineer. And so I was like, traveling that path to try and pursue that. Because I like to mix, but I never really viewed the studio as something that was worth pursuing, because I was kind of thinking more like monetarily, like, it's going to be hard to find work in a studio, and it's going to be hard to, make money as a studio. Cause I always heard about all these internships, and it takes so long to climb up the ladder. And I just felt like, there's plenty of work in the live sound field, and, there's obviously room to grow, and I could become like a front of house engineer and mix shows, which are things that I found really fascinating and challenging. But then once work slowed down for the winter, I ended up landing an internship at a studio. And my first day at the studio, that we were recording guitars, and I was just like listening to all these recordings of like drums that sounded amazing, and we were just like plugged in all these guitar amps, and we're like getting all these crazy tones. I was like, whoa, like this is something that I could do for the rest of my life. Like that was the second aha moment where it's like, I feel like I belong here. I feel like this is something that I could really get good at, and would really enjoy exploring.
That's awesome. And I guess it's a good thing you chose the studio, right? With like, there's absolutely no live work happening for the foreseeable future.
Well, right now, yeah, definitely. And it's funny because I almost dropped out of school after my first year, because I had 2 years, and the first year was all live sound, right? So I had learned a lot and like caught the bug, and was like, oh, I definitely want to be a front of house mixer and work at a great venue, and then eventually like tour, because I wanted to travel and tour the world. And so I almost dropped out and didn't finish my studio year. And a couple of my colleagues and teachers were like, you know what? Like, you shouldn't close your options off like that. You should finish your second year. And because you never know, maybe you can get into like being a Pro Tools op for live shows, for recording and stuff like that. I was like, okay, that's a valid point. So maybe I should stick it out a little bit. And I'm glad I did, because, now I still mix front of house from time to time. Like there's a couple select artists that I do front of house for, but 95% of the work that I do is studio based. So.
Mm-hmm. So what happened? You had this internship at the studio.
Yeah.
What happened after that?
So I worked at the studio in North Toronto called DNA Recording Facility, and it started off as an internship. I worked there for 9 months as an intern, and then I just had a stroke of luck. The head engineer, who'd been the head engineer at that studio since it's opened, went freelance and left his head engineer position. So I was like just next in line. I just happened to be the person who is most appropriate for the job at the time. So I was offered a position as head engineer, and I took it, and I worked there. I worked at that studio until it closed in 2015. So I worked there for about 2.5 years as the head engineer. And
wow.
Yeah, that was a blessing. There had been some of my friends who worked at that studio before I did, had been assistants there for 3 years, and like just climbing the ladder, trying to get to that spot. And I was very fortunate to get that opportunity, because, being thrown into the fire and just being like required to just like handle all those sessions to the best of my ability, especially filling the footsteps of such a skilled engineer who I had learned from was really a challenge, and I'm glad that I did that because it really shaped me.
That's amazing. I guess the studio closed down because like with changing times and like home studios and stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple things. It was like the location wasn't the most ideal. Like it was in North Toronto, so it was like wasn't close to the subway line, and it was hard for artists to get out there. There's a couple reasons, politics and whatnot. So yeah, it just happened that the place closed down. But that was also a blessing too, because then that kind of brought me into the world of like, okay, cool. Like this has been great. I learned so much there. And it was a beautiful facility, like SSL 4000, like plenty of isolation booths, like an amazing sounding room. One of the best control rooms I've ever heard, to be honest. And yeah, so I was like, okay, cool. Now I need to go into the next phase of my life and try and open my own place that I can work out of, because, as a freelance engineer, it's hard to rent out studios and for project to project, like some bands don't have big budgets, or some artists don't have budgets to rent out, $600 rooms, $800 rooms, $1,200 rooms for a day of work. Some people aren't that productive. And, if you're independent, that's a lot of money to come out of your pocket.
Yeah.
So I decided my goal was to make like an affordable recording facility that I could just work out of and kind of build my career from there. So another blessing.
Are you still based out of the studio now?
Yeah, there's a couple different locations throughout the years, but yes, the current location that I'm at I've been there since 2016, so this is year 4. And wow. And yeah, it's been great. It's been a wild ride, but it's been a great time.
Amazing. So let's talk about, I guess you told me that, before we started tracking the interview, how you've kind of been niching down into mixing over the past couple of years. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I'd love to. I always loved to mix, and, working at a facility that had an SSL and all of the outboard gear you could dream of, I learned how to mix on an SSL, and I just loved, I just felt like a kid in a candy shop when I got to mix down after something I've worked on and recorded or whatever. Finally, just get my time to like really put it all together. And so I always enjoyed mixing, but I loved recording, and I loved making, connections with artists and helping, get their vision to the finish line. So it wasn't something that I ever thought I would solely be doing, but over time, recording, there's politics behind recording too. And I just got to the point once again where I was like, I feel that I can be most productive and push myself the most if I am mixing. Because when I'm mixing, I don't really have to rely on anyone else's schedule as much as I would if I was a recording engineer or a producer. I'd find that a lot of the artists that I would work with and bands that I'd work with would have their own desired pace to do the project, and I would be wanting to devote my time to it and get it done sooner and turn it around quicker. Cause I just feel like there's something special about working on a project and just like living in it for X amount of time. Like if you work on a record and you spend a month with that group or with that artist working on this record, like you're in it. You don't have to get refamiliarized with where you left off. You're in it every day. You're living it. And maybe if I was doing that more often, that maybe I wouldn't just be mixing, but I found that when I was mixing, I'd live with a song for a day, 2 days, 3 days, however long it took. And it just felt more fulfilling to me. And I felt like I could be productive and I could improve at a quicker pace because, the amount of time it takes you to progress from your last mix to your next mix, if you're constantly reflecting and constantly trying to improve, if you're mixing all the time, you're gonna improve with a better pace, right? So
yeah, that's so interesting. You're saying that. Like, I've kind of been having this like workflow where I'll work with an artist on a production, and I'll have them come in for a few hours, once or twice a week, and it's just kind of like it's really good because it gives you an objectivity of like, okay, let's sit with this for a second, let's listen back, let's take a minute, and come back the next session, and we have like a better idea of what we want to do moving forward. But on the other hand, you're not like in that zone constantly because you're just juggling it amongst a bunch of other projects. Right. And I definitely hear what you're saying. There's some magic gets lost when you're not just constantly in that zone. Absolutely. And I find that the records that I've done, because there have been plenty of records where it's been like, okay, here's our X amount of time, we're doing this 1 month, 2 months, however it is.
And those are the records that mean the most to me on a personal level, because the connection